Hello? 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 Hello?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
You can hear me all right, I guess. Let's see, I'm Derry from Equal Exchange.
Hi, Derry. My name is Han.
Nice
You
to
see
meet
me?
you. Yep, I can. Can you see me?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
We are the only ones, right?
Apparently. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna move something right here real quick. Done. Excellent. Now you should be able to hear me.
Do you think so? Han, Derry, can you hear me?
Hi, Joel. Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, Han and Derry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yep.
There's some kind of
Echo.
echo.
Yeah, it strikes me for our conversation that we're going to have to speak and then just give people a little space. I hear that delay as well, so just for the flow of the conversation, I'll try to be mindful of it.
Great.
But maybe on the other hand,
I think I just lost you, John. Can you say something?
Hi
Yep.
guys, how
Can
are
you hear me, Derry?
we need headphones. The echo is because people aren't wearing headphones.
Okay, how's that?
Actually, Hans, you might not need them if you hold on one sec, Hans. Derry, can you talk to me real quickly?
Who do you want to talk? Me?
Yep. Okay, testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay, Hans, you're okay. Can everyone still hear me?
Yeah, but I will also put on my earphone. Maybe that's better. No.
You can't hear me?
Yes, I can now. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to fix everyone's audio.
And this is John. Am I coming through okay?
Yes, you are, John. John, do me a favor. If you have any other applications or tabs open on your computer that aren't really necessary, can you just do me a favor and close some of those out?
Are you talking to me, Emily?
Yes, please, John.
So I only heard the part you're breaking up a bit.
Okay, sorry. Could you close any extra tabs that you might have?
Yeah, I think I closed everything down.
Great. All right, perfect. So guys, we're actually already live, which means our audience can hear us. But we'll just cut that out in the beginning for the archive, so it won't be a problem. I'm going to get the last speaker on, and you'll be ready to go whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, one sec.
Good morning.
Hey,
In the
good morning.
better late than never category.
Yeah.
Daniele, thank you for coming on.
Hi, Han. Hi, John. Hi, Dari.
Hi, Daniela. Hi.
All right. Well, since this is our group, and if I understand we're live, then we should start. What do you guys think?
Fine.
Sounds
Yeah?
good.
Okay. Good. Well, thank you all. Welcome for coming. For those of you who are watching, this continues a dialogue that the Institute of Corporate Responsibility has been hosting. Our pleasure to host. And thanks so much for Dari and for Han and Daniele for coming. And the dialogue is meant to try to work through some issues in this area of, most broadly, in the area of corporate responsibility when it comes to purchasing commodities and the impact that supply chains have, social, economic, political. But we've been focusing particularly on cocoa. And we've been even more so trying to look at a particular aspect, which is the idea of conflict-free cocoa. And one reason for that phrase is that, as you may recall, in the United States, a bill was passed around conflict-free minerals as an approach to trying to address at least analogous issues, supply chains, their impact on society, particularly on conflict. And we thought at least to start, we would frame the issue around conflict-free chocolate and to see if that really made any sense to frame it that way or search for better ways of framing the issue of achieving what we want, which is to reduce the negative impact sometimes that the supply chains can have social, economically, politically on people. So we all aspire here, the group that is gathered, for kind of the same idea, having a positive impact on society, both from the economic impact of those who are growing cocoa and as it makes its way up the supply chain, and use that supply chain, the power of the purchasing, to try to get changes in the way it is done. So hopefully that brings everyone up to speed a little bit. I wanted to start, I wanted to ask each of our guests to just say a few words about themselves in terms of how they come to this issue and maybe just how they have been involved in it in the past. So Dari, if I might start with you, Dari Goodrich, Chocolate Products Manager with Equal Exchange.
Yeah, hi, and thanks, John and Han and Daniele. It's great to be here today. So it should be an interesting conversation. My name is Dari Goodrich. I work for Equal Exchange. We are one of the pioneers of fair trade coffee, actually, in the United States, founded in 1986. And our mission really is to more closely connect small-scale farmers with the market and with consumers, especially in the U.S. Really try and bridge that gap so that there's more transparency and more of the farmer story is being told in the U.S. and more of the benefits of trade are actually getting back to small-scale farmers. We, as I said, we started in coffee, but we also do tea and chocolate, and I'm our chocolate products manager. We have a line of over 15 different chocolate bars. We do hot cocoa mixes. We do sugar as well. And I've been doing that for about 6 years. We're sourcing from Latin America and working with different production facilities around the world, and really through cocoa and chocolate, really trying to make sure that farmers are actually benefiting from trade. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Dari. And I'm sure we'll come back to some of those issues and some of your experiences in trying to implement certain standards for which these products are grown. So Han, could I ask you to go next? Han de Groot, Executive Director for UTZ Certified.
Yes, thank you and good morning. My name is Han de Groot from UTZ Certified. UTZ Certified is a program and label for sustainable agriculture. We started about 12 years ago with a coffee program, and I think 5 years ago we added tea and chocolate to our portfolio. The chocolate sector, our chocolate portfolio is growing very fast, which now in half the time it has about the same size as the coffee portfolio. We are working in almost all cocoa producing origins, and we are actually a certification organization. That's what I forgot to say. We help farmers. We do 4 things basically. We help farmers to be trained in better agricultural practice, in a sustainable way of producing. we have a standard that sets the norm for that and makes the better cocoa marketable to an international market. Then we trace the cocoa from the farm gate to the supermarket shelf. And last but not least, we help to create markets for sustainable products through addressing chocolate and coffee and tea companies and helping them to make commitments for a more sustainable supply chain. And we do that now successfully in a lot of consuming countries.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for that overview, Han. And our other contributor is Danielle Giovannucci, CEO for Committee on Sustainability Assessment. Danielle?
Quite a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Good morning to everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. And thank you for inviting us. We're very happy to be part of this discussion. For us, the topic of sustainability is obviously everything we do. And our perspective of this is a bit of a business perspective, if you will, or practical perspective, in that we think that there are a lot of different efforts being made increasingly every year. There's more consciousness around these topics. There's more interest from consumers, more interest from companies and NGOs as well, not to mention, of course, the farmer community itself. And despite all of this interest, we really don't have a lot of clarity or good scientifically based data to understand what the outcomes are, what is really working well and what isn't working so well in terms of getting the results that we all hope to have. So our effort for the last 7 years has been to evolve, along with many dozens of global institutions, partner institutions, a series of methods that are standardized or common across the world and across different commodities to help understand these the production of these products in their inherent multi-dimensional way. So looking at the economic, the social, and the environmental aspects in unison as a holistic approach to understand where the trade-offs are and to better determine the optimal policies, investments, and approaches that make these commodities viable for the producers that are involved with them, for whom they are often a key livelihood. So thank you for inviting us.
Okay, very nice. Thank you, Daniele. And I do see that Alex has joined us, which is fantastic. Alex Whitmore, co-founder of Taza Chocolate. Alex, I was just asking each person, you're the final one, to just say a few remarks about yourself and your organization and how you come to this issue and the like, so people can understand a little background on you and your perspective.
Sure, thank you. Sorry about that. But yeah, so we are a bean bar in Somerville. We really because of what we needed.
No, would not.
Sorry, what we needed to.
So,
can you hear me now? Better?
yes, so that's much
Okay,
better. I was
sorry
just going
about
to say,
that.
Alex, we really couldn't hear you.
I'll start again. My name is Alex Whitmore. I'm with Taza Chocolate. We're a bean to bar chocolate manufacturer based in Somerville, Massachusetts. And we came to this issue in this industry in a unique way because of the nature of the product we manufacture, which is a really unique stone ground Mexican style chocolate. We needed a really high quality cocoa bean. And that drove us to the work we've been doing at Origin. We work directly with producer groups in several countries in the Americas and the Caribbean to buy ultra premium quality cocoa beans, and the work that we do on the ground level is really to cultivate long-term sustainable relationships to obtain really high quality cacao for our production. In that process, we've tried to become pioneers in what we call ethical trade practices. We pioneered a direct trade program whereby we purchase cacao at very high premiums above the market price. We make sure all that product is certified organic, and we make sure all that premium money goes directly to the producer or the producer groups that we're working with. We also annually publish a transparency report where we actually publish the prices that we pay and the volumes of cacao that we purchase from each group. And that's available all online at howsachocolate.com under our direct trade page. So that's kind of the angle where we're coming from, and why we're excited to be here.
That's great. Thank you, Alex. So I wanted to start, if I could, and maybe start in a very narrow, specific topic around cocoa that's gotten some attractions over the years. I know the students here at GW who are interested in food justice always pick up on an issue, and that is the use of slave labor or forced labor, particularly children, in the production and the growing of cocoa. I wonder if I could just ask kind of each of you to go around, maybe we can talk about, you know, how big, if you will, of a problem or how much of a concern is that we might focus on and then look to rid it out of the supply chain. I just wonder if each of you in your own experiences from your own perspectives might talk about how you see that particular problem. But what I'm trying to aim for is to get it focused on what might we do to eliminate it to the extent, whether small or large it is, in that supply chain and part of the production operations. So maybe Han, could I start with you and get your view on that and how you see that?
That's all right. Thanks. We see it as a big problem. Child labor is quite embedded in the chocolate industry, especially in West Africa. There are many displaced people, a lot of migration, not only today but also in the past. So that leads to incomplete families, children looking to contribute, let's say, to the sources of income of a family, or sometimes not even their own family, looking for shelter. So yeah, it's not only a chocolate problem, it's also a poverty problem. And in the harvest season, cocoa needs a lot of work. So then child labor is maybe too easily available. What we do as a certification organization is that we, of course, eliminate child labor in our standards, and we see to it that the auditors have a keen eye on looking for occasions of child labor. While saying this, I must also add that, of course, certification cannot be the only solution to that. So to a large extent, we can help to prevent children working in certified farms, but in order to really give them a future and a better alternative to working, there is a lot more needed. And that is, you know, the countries and the regions that we're talking really develop themselves out of poverty, and that bigger investments are made, for instance, in education. Another example, let's say a more positive example than the elimination example, is our work together with ICI, the International Cocoa Initiative, that trains people in cooperatives to be a sort of contact person, to be there for remedial action, to prevent child labor, to discuss problems, to make communities better aware of the detrimental effects of child labor, etc. So that's more or less what we do. I think now that we are growing as an initiative, the time comes also closer to looking not only at our own impact, but at what the whole sector is doing, because this is really at least a sector problem, but probably a bigger problem even.
Yeah, so Han, if I could follow up, it sounds like, you know, that for a company that might want to say the cocoa that we're purchasing that may go into our chocolate products if it's certified, we would want to be able to say to our customers that if we buy a certified product of cocoa, that we can, say we guarantee, we're 100% sure, there's absolutely no chance of any forced or slave child labor in this product. But if I'm hearing you right, what you're saying is that in any certification program, not just your own, of course, but others, that probably would be too far of a stretch for a company to want to try to make that communication to their customers solely relying on certification. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I think what the company can do, and what we can do, is make 100% effort.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also more parties involved here. So yeah, we can do this only together. And I think in recent times only we see the cocoa debate developing internationally. With that, I mean to say that, you know, certification as an alternative has been growing fast and is developing itself market-wise out of the niche. So that makes companies, well, I think we have helped to make companies aware of the problem and commit themselves to eliminate child labor and also to take other measures for sustainability. But now, for instance, governments are also giving a better acknowledgement of the problem. Where a couple of years ago it was hard to speak about child labor in, for instance, Ivory Coast, without facing a lot of political sensitivities and close to almost denial of the problem. Now, for instance, the First Lady, you know, has made herself responsible for a program preventing this. So I'm positive that more parties acknowledge it and contribute. But
Okay, great.
also true, there's still a long way to go.
Yeah. So, you know, you could see that definitely a problem in large production, large sourcing, large purchasing. But Alex, let me ask you, maybe as a smaller company, would you be able to make the claim to your customers 100% sure that there is not this problem within your supply chain and you can represent your products as being slave-free, forced labor-free, child labor-free, as a nature of just your size and able to manage your operations more directly?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, as a company, we imported about 125 metric tons last year, which, you know, for the big manufacturers, they use that amount of beans in like a day or two. So we're really small compared to a lot of those big companies. And because of that, we do have a much closer eye kind of on the ground where we are sourcing our beans, because we can, you know. And I think that's given us a great benefit. Also, we've chosen to work in parts of the world that have historically not had as much trouble with this particular issue, working in the Caribbean and the Americas. And I think that, you know, as much as you can be sure of anything, you know, we do our best to, when we visit and meet with our producers at least once a year, oftentimes on multiple occasions each harvest period. We spend time in the communities. We spend time working with the producers. We actually do a lot of work trying to evaluate the impact that we're having in the communities, the impact that our direct trade pricing is having from a financial standpoint and also from a social standpoint. And that, you know, that means us asking questions like, how many of your school-age children are actually attending school? You know, do you have money for the books? Do you have money for healthcare for your family? Those kinds of questions arise. And, you know, in some parts of the world, we have, like in Belize, for instance, we actually work with producers so when their kids are home from school for the weekend, that's when they kind of all as a family go out into the fields and harvest the pods off the tree kind of as a family, so that they're not being taken out of school to go help mom and dad to pull the pods down from the tree. So that's an example of how we incorporate that kind of challenge into our process and our relationships with the producers that we work with. And I think it's different in every culture and every place you go. But the one thing we are definitely very wary and watchful of is we want to make sure there's no indentured kind of labor happening on the farms, and that includes people taking advantage of displaced families. We've seen a little bit of this in the Dominican Republic, where you have some Haitian migrants that aren't being treated the same as some of the Dominican workers on the farm, and that's something we watch out for very closely in that region.
Right. Well, that really raises two, I think, really interesting points. When you're smaller, as people might imagine, then it's a little easier just to manage the day-to-day, and even you drawing the distinction between, well, whether it's just child labor or whether that's just a family farm operating, that takes that kind of hands-on knowledge of what's going on the ground, right, in order to draw those small little distinctions. And again, because of your size, maybe you can choose areas where to source your cocoa from that maybe don't have such a tradition. Like Han mentioned, it's not just a cocoa problem, it's a larger problem, but you may be working in areas that don't have that much, and you can afford, if you will, the luxury, or you can target strategically to go to those areas. So,
yeah, absolutely. That being said, I would like to just add one more point. I would like to, at some point, take the model that we've been implementing in the parts of the world that we've been operating in, the Dominican Republic, Belize, Bolivia, and actually bring that to areas of the world that have more economic challenges on the ground, specifically West Africa, and even places like the Congo, where it's really difficult to do business. But I think there's a lot of impact that an organization like us could have as we continue to grow.
Yeah. Well, that just perfectly anticipated what I was going to ask Daniele to join in, which is, so how easily do you think, Daniele, we're able to take some of the practices of the smaller producers who are concerned about these issues because of their reputation, their brand reputation, also their own corporate ethics and code of ethics, and translate those up to larger levels of production and operation? Do they translate, or will we have to find whole nother approaches to the larger levels of production that at least Han was kind of referring to, that they have to struggle with?
It's a challenging question, and I think the first thing is to actually congratulate people like Alex who care enough to actually go beyond just the transactions with farmers to understand what's going on in their communities. A lot of the issues you brought up, and most of the ones we'll discuss today, ultimately come down to abject levels of poverty among the producers of these commodities, and it's not just cocoa, of course. That challenge itself is the underlying basis, right, for a lot of the issues we're discussing, and so the solution is as big as that challenge inherently. I think there is no single approach to this. There's as much complexity as there is inherently in sustainability itself. So one of the solutions is for us is information, and I think that kind of approach is what Alex alluded to, saying he looks at the impact on farmers, asks about schooling, and proxies are important indicators that things are going fairly well in a community. we know for a fact, because we've actually evaluated some of their projects, that organizations like UTS specifically, do a lot of that. They're very committed to understanding the impacts that they're having and what's occurring for farmers in the communities where they operate. So these things are important. The challenge so far in terms of scaling up has been that not a lack of information. We know that these problems exist. The scale and scope is horrific. I mean, there's a lot of it. It's not just a rare occurrence here and there. There's really much more than one might think, and it isn't just cocoa. I mean, this is just across the world in many commodities produced by smallholders. The levels of poverty are pretty sad, and so the solution, from our perspective, to understand what's going on, to make good decisions, is having a sound basis of information. We have a lot of anecdotal evidence, but it's difficult to convince a donor, a government, even an NGO sometimes, much less a company that's buying. And companies are obviously the big actors here. To take action, to invest in new alternatives or approaches that are not evidently and clearly for them leading to a positive outcome. And I think that's been one of the challenges of most of the assessments, is that they've been not very well done. Unfortunately, there's not the types of studies that have typically occurred. A lot of one-off research are not comparable, so the lessons are difficult to mount. It's a bit like everybody doing math or accounting with their own system. Try to have a conversation about, the results. It's almost impossible. So it's difficult to build a body of knowledge without a certain consistency of approach, which is what we're committed to, is to helping organizations develop not just a more consistent, but a transparent and a reliable approach, so that when we see things that work, like what Alex is doing, what Han is doing, those can be promoted as something to really scale up. And conversely, when we see things that don't work, that we can point that out, and we know that certainly organizations like UTS Certified and Equal Exchange and TAZO and others have a commitment to this approach and want to know when things aren't working. The same way you'd want to know if you're a student or if you're running a business. You want to know if you're doing well or not. And I think that communication, open, something that can be confirmed in the field, say by another researcher, an institution, or by anyone, is key to learning what's working, what isn't, and being able to scale what we learn. I think that's become the core challenge at the moment for us, as well as the capacity on the ground, and obviously making use of the learning. First and foremost, without it, we're kind of operating blindly with a lot of good ideas, a lot of great intention, but we all know which way the road to hell is paved, as the saying goes. It's paved with good intentions, and so while they're valuable, they're just not enough. We need to get good information in a consistent way.
Right.
Thanks.
So, Dario, since you've been able to come back and join us, did you hear the previous conversation?
I know what we're talking about. I might have missed some of the points, but I have to apologize if I dropped out. I'm having internet issues today at my work location.
Sure.
So, but just kind of going. I mean, I think as everyone's pointing out, yeah, we know that child slave labor is an issue. We've seen it right within Chilean reports, in the media, a lot of different places, and I think the other thing too to think about is stepping back just from that context and thinking about the worst forms of child labor, right? So there is slavery, but like if you step back, there are a lot of, as everyone said, hundreds of thousands of children working on farms. They could be from their families, and I think that's not always culturally a bad thing, or it's not. If I lived in a farm in the U.S., I might go out and actually work on that farm as a kid. Right, and help my parents. I do chores around the house as a kid, but when they're not able to go to school, and when they're actually also put in dangerous positions or working incredibly long hours each day, that's also kind of stepping back from that. Just the focus on the slave labor issue, and kind of from our perspective, Equal Exchange, I think we, like Taza, really work just in Latin America, right? So I've never actually seen this on the ground in West Africa. I've never been there, so I don't have that firsthand experience. But we are working in Latin America, which is a different context. But ultimately, I feel like it's just not acceptable to have these issues going on in 2014. And it does, like everyone else is saying, it comes down to, in my mind, a poverty issue and what farmers are getting paid. And so from our perspective, what we're trying to do is decommodify cocoa, right? There needs to be more direct linkage between the people selling the product in the market and the people, Hershey's, Mars, really working on the ground and seeing it not just as a commodity, but as a livelihood for farmers around the world. And so that's really what we're trying to do, and tell that story in the U.S. And change that perspective for consumers in the U.S. to really kind of know where their product is coming from, and have that traceability. And you know what? No system is perfect. So I think, like you were asking, John, can you say 100% guarantee there's none of these issues in any system? I think that's impossible to say. But I do think that having certification systems, one, from that perspective, you're actively looking for these issues. You actually have a mechanism to kind of educate farmers and consumers on these issues, as well as people in the middle in the supply chains. And you have a mechanism to react if it happens. And this has happened, in Ghana, one of the biggest fair trade cocoa co-ops. They did find child labor, and they actually did react and have done a lot of work to address that issue. And third, with the certification system, if the co-ops or the farmers don't address the issue, there's a negative impact on their co-op if they're removed from that certification, from the certification system. And there's often a monetary value to that they're going to be losing, right? So in some ways, there's a self-policing, an idea of self-policing because of the value of the certifications. And so I think those are just some points from my perspective.
Right. So, Han, I don't see you on the screen. I don't know if you're able to come back and answer, whether we lost contact. But maybe we could just shift a little bit the conversation and look at it from the point of view of say, the retailer, of the business that is selling a product to their customer, or even in a restaurant. And maybe I could ask you all to say, what is a way that you think is reasonable for that business to characterize, so in this case their chocolate, could be other products, to their customer? Of course, if we say, well, it's 100% guaranteed, maybe that's a standard that's impossible for anyone to meet for any standard. But if the basic idea is that it doesn't have this kind of indentured labor that got mentioned, or any slave labor, is that a reasonable standard that firms should try to aspire to, and then we work to develop the right operations, the right procedures, standards, certification, ethical sourcing to achieve it? Or are we misstating what is really achievable and realistic in the cocoa supply chains today? What is it that's the most aspirational thing, but also most reasonable thing that retailers should try to communicate to their customers that they're selling them as regards this issue in their chocolate? So, Han, I was going to start with you. You may have the most experience in this field and understanding maybe how retailers are thinking about it.
Yeah, okay. I think, if we think about bigger retailers, those who have most impact, the Walmarts and the Tesco's, the Ahold, like here in Europe, Rewe, they of course deal with a range of products. Like if you go to the supermarket shelf and you want to buy chocolate, you can choose, between maybe 25 and 100 different types of chocolate. So I think it's very important for them to put pressure on their supply chain. Only few of those supermarkets make chocolate themselves. There are some examples who have their own industries, but most of them, they buy it or they order it somewhere as a private label. So especially the big ones have quite some power in the supply chain by demanding, for instance, certified products. That's what we see a lot now, that supermarkets actually will go, I think, through a process of where they are at the moment, trying to influence their supply chain by saying, okay, I want a certain guarantee that this product is sustainably produced, for instance, through working with a certification scheme, towards, and this won't happen overnight, towards a moment where the supermarket can say, well, maybe you don't have to watch all these labels, but maybe, my name is enough for the customer to trust that good products are sold within my shops. And so this differs, of course, from region to region, country to country, supermarket to supermarket. But really, to bring this to scale, we need important, bigger multinational companies to invest in this. The supermarkets can do it by putting pressure on that chain. while bigger chocolate and confectionery manufacturers can do this, and some of them do that, but also taking responsibility not only for the end of it, for the packaging and the chocolate making, but also for instance, research in better planting material, better farming systems. I think there is maybe three categories. The small ones, like for instance the Tazas, who can really target a special market of consumers who are interested in the origin and want to pay extra. Then perhaps you can really organize your own supply chain. So there you have a direct impact. And the big ones who can have some influence because their market force is so big. There's a sort of middle ground. I think for them it's a bit harder, and they will have to connect, to internationally acknowledged quality schemes like ours who work across the sector. But it's especially good, I think, to keep on appealing to the big industry partners because they can really make a difference. The chocolate or cocoa chain is one of the most narrow ones, if you like. So if you see the chain as a, can I point it like this, as a glass hour, then the narrow part of it is occupied by maybe 10, 20 big international companies, and they can make a lot of difference. So that's one of the aims of our organization, to target those where you have a big impact on the total market, rather than, for instance, on the consumer or the retailer who is maybe up in the glass hour, but who has smaller impact on the total.
Right. So let me ask the others maybe to respond to what Han mentioned, because earlier, we talked about the challenges that certification faces, that for all the good efforts, again, it's not going to be a guarantee, but again, trying to help understand, so what is it that a firm can claim? They can claim, well, we're trying to remove the child labor, or we're doing the best we can about the child labor, or we hope there's not any in it. But that's not a very persuasive message when it comes to marketing products to people. And some of those people would like to be able to say, I know I'm buying this chocolate, and I know that my money's not going to any production and operations that uses slaves. And to the extent that there's a market there for that kind of affiliation, how do we move from that certification to maybe a greater level? Or, like I said, maybe we're asking the firms to say it in a way which really isn't very reasonable or realistic. What do the rest of you think? Daniele?
I'm sorry, but I'm having some substantial difficulty. I deeply apologize in understanding what I'm not getting a great audio feed. Um, so I'm sorry, I don't know, I didn't get the question. I'm seeing that we're talking about supply chain and retailers, but I couldn't get more. Apologies. Could you type it to me or direct it to someone else until I get that?
Sure. So, Derry, can you hear me, and you want to try to answer back? What is fair to try to represent to customers and to expect businesses to represent to customers in this area of slave labor or indentured labor?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated question. I think if you're talking also at the biggest scale, I think you need to be careful of, from our perspective, right? We want to talk, what we want to put out there in the market is talking about how we're doing things differently and trying to change the way that trade is done by working directly with producers, by paying a higher price, again, knowing nothing is perfect, but that's kind of the mission of our company, right? And saying, this is how we do things as a company, as an organization. And I think, so if you're pushing kind of the retailers, I think it's good for them to push. I think we want to educate consumers. That's a lot of what we do. So they kind of really understand where their food is coming from and the challenges and issues supply chains and the challenges and issues that small-scale farmers face. And so I think the retailers have that role to or can do that. They're their place to really educate consumers. But I think the challenge is not over, how to not kind of overstate the reality. And we're also, there's a lot of greenwashing out there. There's a lot of companies that are saying they're doing a lot more than they are doing. So it's definitely a challenge. And I think that's something that we always say out there is for companies to, or people, consumers in the market to let's say first, look for a certification, but it really needs to go deeper than that, right? That's just the first layer of the onion. And people need to go behind that and really understand why are companies doing what they're doing, and are companies doing it because there's a market there, or are they doing it because they're really mission driven? And so I think that's the challenge we face, and at the larger scale is to push some of these bigger companies and organizations to do this for the right reasons, not just because the market is telling them to do that, because otherwise I don't think you're going to get the real change that we're looking at on the large scale. And I think that's really the role that we at Equal Exchange and Taza and other fair trade and smaller kind of bean to bar makers that's our role, is to kind of always set the bar a little bit higher and higher, and be that positive example, again, to kind of grow the consumer movement, and can be done differently.
Yeah. So, Alex, what do you think about that? From your earlier, discussions, you obviously are trying to position your product in the market, right, a certain way, and it sounds like through transparency, you're trying to communicate that you're doing all you can to represent, if I might say, to have an authentic product that represents what you've said you would do. Is it reasonable to go to the marketplace and try to say our aspiration is to have, conflict-free chocolate, a chocolate that doesn't involve slave labor, and then it's just a matter of working harder? Or is that the wrong way to position the nature of the product to the customer?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I really I feel a lot of the same ways that Derry feels about it, and agree with his statements entirely. We're a specialty chocolate company, and we spend a lot of time explaining our mission and really the values that we stand behind when we make and sell our products. And we try to set the highest bar possible in the industry, in the bean to bar chocolate making industry, by publishing our transparency reports. We spend a lot of time and money working on that. On sourcing our ingredients, not just our cocoa, but all of our ingredients. And, I think we can go really far, but it's a select few that are really understanding of what's happening in the cocoa industry and that are really following that. And we found it's actually a lot of our work and a lot of the transparency we try to create kind of falls on deaf ears, which is it's hard for me because I'm so emotionally invested in everything that we're doing. And then, I have a conversation with someone and the next thing I hear out of their mouths is, "Oh yeah, we love this free trade chocolate you're making." And they really don't, it doesn't really connect, and they don't really understand the realities on the ground, and telling that story is so complicated. When people are spending money on chocolate, they don't want to think about this stuff. They want to enjoy their chocolate, and so kind of conveying all of these complex issues in the marketplace and all the work that we're doing to try to make a really ethical and high quality product. At the end of the day, people just want to eat their chocolate and enjoy themselves, and that's a really hard barrier to get beyond. And I think that a lot of the work that we put into the sourcing efforts and the transparency reports and all that stuff is really something that's pushing the industry and not so much making a huge impact in the consumer realm. So hopefully that will change in time, and it's something that we work on hard with our educational efforts and such. But that's our experience.
Yeah. So, and Daniele, I'll ask you to join in a second. I mean, it seems like we have this tale of two cities when it comes to the consumers. That on one hand, of course, there's all this attention to the products. Corporations are facing pressure to claim that their products are sustainable from NGOs or from policy reaches. This gets a lot of attention. It puts their brand at risk. And then at the same time, as Alex just mentioned, or Derry has a bit, a set group of people buying the chocolate don't know and maybe don't care. It puts the corporations in a difficult position to know what's the best way to try to, to make and represent their product. So, Daniele, you wanted to respond now that I think you've been able to hear and what the question is.
Thanks, John. I hope I'm sorry I'm only catching part of your input. I am hearing the rest, but if I understood well, I think that the issue, this is the evocative issue, the issue of slave labor, of child labor, but it is really only the spearhead, the point of a number of other issues, as several of my colleagues pointed out. It's a complex issue of poverty, and because of the inherent complexity of even the supply chains, it's rare that even the traders that are operating, much less the brands that are buying. And there are cases, of course, where people are going to origin. Dari and Alex certainly do that, but in many cases that doesn't occur. And so for the bulk of coffee, of cocoa, it's next to impossible to tell exactly where it came from and what the conditions were. So even increasingly with certifications, or where there are well organized and cooperatives that can be trusted, good cooperatives, you can begin to overcome this problem through these direct relationships and have a reasonable level of trust. But ultimately, the bulk of it still does come in a sort of a fungible process that is gathered in a variety of different remote areas, and you're not sure what you're getting or really from where. So traceability is increasingly, or has always been, a bit of a problem in this case. I don't think it's easy for any company to make the claim. I know that several of the large brands have spent literally millions of dollars, as well as several development agencies that have worked in the region, spending a lot of money trying to figure out how they can do that. And increasingly, we're getting close. There is technology. There are entities like Source Trust and others that are able to penetrate further and further along the supply chain to get clear information, including video and other kinds of information about the farms and the conditions of farms where folks are operating. But it'd probably be a decade before this is effective enough to really begin to make a big dent. So for the moment, we're dealing with levels of trust, essentially. And because of the complexity of the supply chain and the farmer conditions and remote farms, uh, many companies have made the bet that their way of managing this particular risk, both for their reputations as well as their concern about the farmers that they deal with, is in certifications. And while many people have pointed out, I think even Han might agree, that it isn't the only answer. It's not the perfect, complete answer for every farmer. It is certainly one of the best solutions available right now to convey a measure of credibility or some level of clarity about the kinds of farmers that the companies are buying from. So I think that's one of the best proxies available now in terms of a market mechanism to both transmit value from a consumer, hopefully all the way down to a producer. So when a consumer votes with their dollars by buying something that has a premium price, or as someone pointed out earlier, is somewhat decommoditized, right? Where we're adding a different kind of value, as long as that price reaches the farmer, and that's a big if, because we increasingly see that money gets routed to many different directions, and the farmer does not get the full benefit typically of it. So that's a bit of a challenge still, but the approach is useful. We have this market mechanism that can do that. At least in theory, it isn't fully optimized yet, but it's on its way. And up the supply chain, it conveys traceability. It conveys that it's doing training. It's in touch with farmers. So there is a reasonable measure of assurance. But there is no magic solution to this. There's simply the need to increasingly invest in the poverty levels of these producers to eliminate the conditions under which these kinds of horrific practices occur. And that takes investment. It takes the supply chain shifting some of its priorities. And I think that discussion, which is anathema to most companies, right, saying that we're all going to pay a lot more for cocoa, even for a lot of consumers. But ultimately, that is going to be the solution, because if it's not sustainable in the end, farmers will increasingly get out. And so cocoa will increasingly cost more and more. As is happening right now, the main production site in the world, about half the world's cocoa comes from one country, Cote d'Ivoire, which has its own internal political and other socioeconomic problems. And we're seeing a lot of substitution, a lot of farmers beginning to vote to have another crop like rubber or palm or things that are more remunerative for them at the moment. And if that continues to happen, especially in key origins like Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Indonesia, you begin to see that cocoa is going to go up in price. And that doesn't necessarily benefit everyone, but that's the kind of outcome that will occur if we can't resolve these problems now. It'll
Yeah.
happen naturally later.
Can I say
So,
something on this
right.
consumer
Yes, of course.
part, John? Yeah. I think we need to realize that the consumer, you call it the dichotomy, maybe it's a sort of paradox. If you ask the consumer, many consumers, and we see that in lots and lots of researches, will say, yes, I want a sustainable product. Yes, I'm willing to pay more for this if my company gives me a certain guarantee that this is produced well. But on Saturday morning in the supermarket, he makes a decision in a split second. And so there's a sort of dichotomy between what the consumer expresses as a citizen, so to speak, to the researchers and maybe write in the newspaper, and what the consumer does in the supermarket as a consumer. So we think that the conscious consumer can maximum have maybe 10, maybe 5% market share. So we need to find ways to convince, and I think we are increasingly doing it actually, to bring companies on board, because they have more possibility. They don't decide in a split second. They base their long-term investments on things like, how is the cocoa sector doing? Is there a serious competition, like Daniela suggested, for instance, from rubber and palm oil? Will I lose my market share if I don't invest in this? So more and more very straightforward business-like decisions are also guiding investments into a more sustainable cocoa sector.
So, Han, taking that observation, and I know all the years that you've been working on it, maybe we should, if I could say it this way, maybe we should give the consumers a break, and maybe we should see if there's a business case to be made for purchasing what we might call sustainable cocoa without having to represent that to the consumer so directly. I mean, Alex, can you think of a good business case for making the product a certain way, let's just call it sustainable or conflict-free, but without having to try to convince the consumer that that's an important part of the product, that the product just tastes good, is well priced, is well positioned in the market? Is there a business case behind doing that?
Well, I think the business case is having all cocoa, even commodity grade cocoa, costing about $4,000 a ton, somewhere between $36,000 and $4,000 a ton. I think if that happens, then and that should happen. I think that there's a lot of things at play that make cocoa cheaper than it should be, and it's still right now it's trading somewhere in the $3,000 a ton range, which is considered high by some. I think it's still incredibly low, and I think over time we need to teach consumers that chocolate isn't just cheap candy. There's a lot of affiliations with chocolate and candy in the consumer's mind, and chocolate just isn't candy. I mean, there's definitely chocolate candy out there, but the kind of chocolate that we make and the kind of chocolate that I think the consumers who are buying fair trade chocolate bars like Equal Exchange products or Taza products, they know they're not buying candy. They're buying something a little bit different. They're buying something that's got a lot more value than just a hard candy. And I think that really thinking about chocolate differently is something that is going to have to shift in the consumer mind. And I think the way that that's going to happen is, cocoa is going to get really expensive, and that needs to happen. If it doesn't happen, we'll be in trouble, and it will happen because as producers start producing the same amount or less cocoa, and the world demand continues to increase, prices will go up. Supply and demand will correct that, and as cocoa gets more expensive, more farmers will produce it, and it'll correct itself. But I think that's really the only way that this is going to happen. Is everyone needs to be buying cocoa at a much higher price. Every manufacturer, not just the specialty guys trying to convince the consumer to spend a lot more on this conflict-free chocolate.
So, Derry, can you weigh in on that? Do you think there's a business case to be made for trying to meet these sustainability standards that, of course, Han works so hard to try to reach, and Alex in his own product, but in a way that doesn't kind of compel the consumer to engage the whole story and to be a part of it, that it's just simply good business to deliver that kind of product, and you can make money doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Alex is saying, I think to do it in a way that's fair and is going to work for everyone, prices across the board for farmers need to go up, right? So that it does create this fair playing field, and so it brings a lot of those externalities that are outside of a 50-cent or a $1 chocolate bar into the reality of what the pricing is, and so people realize kind of all the value that's in that chocolate bar. I think also from a business perspective for some of the large companies, I think we've seen there's not been a ton of investment on the ground and at the farmer level, and so now we're facing major cocoa shortages, or people think, given kind of supply and demand looking forward, and so the reality is this stuff should have been. I think it was a smart business decision to kind of invest at the farmer level long ago, and now that's kind of causing challenges for some of the larger companies and just kind of overall supply. And so really kind of working with producers so that they're creating kind of their own business on their farm, and they're investing in their farm, and they're actually increasing their productivity, and which is going to help everybody along the chain. So.
Right. Well, so if there was something that you can think of that we might do now, I mean, we've talked, and it's been a very helpful discussion, I think, pointing out sometimes that a simple solution and simple policies just really don't add up because of the complexity involved in the supply chain and the production, in the business decisions, even in the consumer decisions. But if there was one thing that you might ask that people might adopt as a policy, whether that's larger businesses or the buyers, or whether it's on the consumer end, something within that supply chain governance, we might say that if you were had your magic wand and you could just make it happen, that would substantially in the near term kind of immediately improve the conditions within the supply chain. Is there something you can think of that you could point to and say at least we could do this thing, and that would help a next step incrementally? Han, do you have something in mind, or some kind of your wish list if there was something, in the near term? Because we've talked about the need for such major changes and transformations in the way that farming is done and farming in the community and on and on. Is there something a little more immediate, short-term, tangible that we could look to and maybe work towards that you think would be really a positive effect?
Yeah. There's one party that has not been mentioned very often in this conversation, and they have been a bit absent in the last few years. That's government. I think both northern as well as southern origin governments have been too absent in this discussion. There are few agricultural sectors that have developed themselves without proper and influential governmental intervention. As long as farmers have no alternatives, then it's very, very hard to plead for instance, higher prices. Because these farmers will always produce however low the price is. So a better agricultural infrastructure where there are alternatives, like maybe planting rubber or going into palm oil or moving elsewhere. Better educational policies, maybe some grip, however difficult on pricing, is also very much a governmental task. And I think we should also be able and willing to have a good and constructive dialogue with governments in origin countries to deal with this. And on the other end, here in Europe, for instance, you know, diplomatic relationships and development cooperation has neglected agriculture too much. It was really not very sexy to be still supporting agriculture in the last 20 years. Only since a few years it's coming back on the agenda, for instance, in the Netherlands, where we have now a more substantial agricultural support budget. So I think these parties are also important, and they have some regulatory tasks that we can help to support. So one of the initiatives, for instance, we are taking is that we are open to work with governments on their national policies, on national cocoa plans, maybe look into a national standard and see what we can do there. I'm sorry, this is not a short-term solution, but it's something we can start tomorrow.
Yeah, great. Alex, if you had your magic wand and could do something, what would you point towards? Or if you could try to convince others to do something, what would you point towards?
We make transparent the work that is being done, the volumes that are being purchased and by whom, just trying to utilize modern technology. That's kind of what it's for, to shorten supply chains, increase visibility, not only for the manufacturer, but also the consumer. I think a little bit of effort in that regard would go a long way towards making the industry more sustainable, more kind of honest, and would actually go. A lot of the business that's being done is brokers and people that are taking advantage of market environments that are opaque. Down long dirt roads in countries that are very difficult to do business with. These people who have these connections are making a lot of money by keeping a great distance and a great communication gap between the end user of these beans and the producer of these beans. So by eliminating that, you can get rid of a lot of the inefficiencies in the system and bring a lot more value to the producers at the ground level. So that's what I would do if I had a magic wand.
I'd like it. Using a financial term, we'd say de-intermediation, right? Just kind of cut out some of those middlemen who are able to take advantages of certain discontinuities in the market. So, yeah, that's great. Daniele, if you had your magic wand, what would you do for some immediate more impact and making supply chains in cocoa more sustainable? If there's something we could do right away, get someone to do something. Can you hear me, Daniele?
Hear me okay? Thanks, John. Appreciate the question. I actually would love a magic wand if you happen to have a spare. I think that for me, my experience is the issue of transparency. There is no simple solution. I think that if we're going to involve an increasingly integrated world where consumers are more and more aware in this hyper-connected world of being Twittered to death and emailed and IM'd, etc., that as we have more and more information, that information be A, credible, and B, transparent. I think then once a consumer sees, and it's not just a consumer, I think any executive in a coffee company, any buyer in a trading company, any NGO, anyone involved in the business, once you see who is actually getting what in this process, what the outcomes are, not just monetarily, but also in terms of other costs and benefits, but really understanding what's going on, then I think people tend to make the optimal choices. Not every time and not all the time, but transparency, I think, is a wonderful light to shed on everything. It's cleansing in many ways, and it's helpful for the sector. I think the more transparent things become, the more competitive they become, the more sustainable and the more viable. So in terms of the long range future of cocoa and the producers being able to see who's getting what and what the costs and benefits are. Again, beyond just the economic, and while that's critically important, I think there are also social issues, as you pointed out, and several of our colleagues have, and also environmental issues that must be dealt with in a holistic way, all together. And once that's available, once more of this information is there and available to consumers, I think the choices that companies, consumers make will drive a difference much more quickly than any of the charitable or kindness or current approaches to sustainability can possibly do. I think that the market can be quite powerful in that way. Thanks.
Super. Derry, what about you?
Yeah, so I think going back to the kind of the core root issue, we're really talking about, again, being poverty driving a lot of these issues, child labor, other issues. And I think if you're looking at that, I think three things. I think transparency, as people have said, right? Really all the companies showing exactly where they are sourcing and what the reality is on the ground. So kind of opening that book up so that everyone can kind of look in there and see what's going on. Floor price, really making sure that farmers are actually getting paid enough to have a sustainable livelihood. And I think a key piece too is empowering farmers. I think we talk about them kind of as someone at the end of the chain, and the reality is they need to be part of all these discussions. And they need to be an active player. And I think for Equal Exchange, we work really strictly with farmer cooperatives, so that they can kind of pool their resources and become kind of an economic and political power in their communities, in their countries, and so they can actually export directly to the market. So the farmers have control of that export, and it's not a farmer selling to an intermediary who's selling to a warehouse who's selling to an exporter, right? So really shortening that chain and making sure the farmers are moving up that chain.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Thanks all of you. I think we're winding up our webcast here, but I did want to go around, and for all of you, if there was any last comments or anything you'd like to say in the day, just wanted to give you a chance to speak anything else. Daniele, do you mind if I go to you first, if you have any last observations or comments you'd like to make?
Is that me?
Yes. Daniele, yes.
Sorry. Okay. Great. When I hear silence, I figure it must be my turn. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. One comment, and that is that I think that a lot of the companies that are the leaders in the chocolate world, both those that are innovators, like the ones that are on this call, and those that are dominant in the marketplace that have been around a long time. There are some great people in all of these companies that are deeply interested in these issues, and they're all involved to some extent. Clearly, not everyone's doing the same thing, nor as much as they could, and that's the nature of this situation. But I think that what they're waiting to hear from really is more and more from the consumers, because a lot of companies have taken on some of these issues without evidence in their own supply chains of a lot of interest, especially the mainstream chocolate manufacturers. There's not a lot of pushback from the consumers they deal with. And I think as people hear more and more, if indeed it is an issue for them, as companies hear more and more from consumers, I think they're more and more likely and more interested to act on these challenges that they face. So I think that pressure is one of the most important things that we can do in terms of really getting clarity about these processes and making sure that corporations understand that it's valuable for their stakeholders to have the right incentives in place to move in the right direction here. So hopefully that's part of what this kind of webcasting can help provide. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you very much. Alex, can I go to you next if you have any last thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, kind of on the lines that Danielle was just speaking on. Market forces are incredibly strong, and they're stronger than anything else. We can talk all day about this, but at the end of the day, if there isn't a market for a product, we're not going to be able to really make it in a sustainable, long-term way. So, getting the world market price to where it needs to be for cocoa farming to be a good business in these communities, to support whole families and communities of people, and making it viable as a commodity, but also as a specialized product. That's something that we have to get the consumers voting with their wallets on all of those issues, and it's kind of up to us. And I think if a large enough portion of the market, the specialty industry, really pushes this issue for even further than we have, we can actually get these larger companies to bend in their practices towards this future vision that we're talking about today of gosh, let's have cocoa be more sustainable. Let's have it be at a higher price. That can happen. And it's all about slowly working away at building the market in that direction. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. That's exactly what I think everyone on this call is working on. So we have to keep fighting that fight, though, and that means continuing to vote with our wallets as companies, but also as consumers.
Great. Derry, how about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think just we know in the discussion and what's out there, it's just a super complex issue, and it's a challenging one. And it's exciting to have this discussion. So thanks for hosting it, and thanks for everyone on the call. I think constantly we at Equal Exchange try and think about we've got to try new things, we've got to change, we've got to innovate. And so I think as long as the industry, as long as we're all continuing to push, I think consumers play a real role in that, in pushing companies to try more and do more. So I think that's where it's going to go. And as Alex said, I think the movement of the specialty chocolate movement in the U.S. I think is also kind of continuing to grow.
Oh, looks like we lost Derry just in the middle. So well, that's a little truncated. So Han, last comments, last observations?
Okay. Let me be brief and just reiterate how urgent the problem is. If you look at the average age of a cocoa farmer, it's pretty high. It's actually beyond what should be a pension date in West Africa. If you look at the age of a tree, it's actually too high to be really productive. So if the cocoa sector wants to give livelihoods to millions of people and fair livelihoods in the future, we need to act now. Otherwise, those trees and those farmers will give up. And that's not only a problem for chocolate lovers, but more so for those who potentially find a good living in a good product. So looking just at those statistics really teaches us that we need to come to action. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Well, thanks to all of you who were as our speakers today, and thanks to those of you who joined us online. I can say I think that at least we met the goals that we hoped, which is, as you've pointed out, it's a complicated issue. At the Institute of Corporate Responsibility, we're always looking to find ways to describe and to understand how corporations can be more responsible. And we always look for ways for collaboration amongst multiple groups to come together and help develop those solutions and implement it. but you also find sometimes in doing that and bringing people together that maybe some ideas or some solutions are a little too simplistic, if you will, to really get implemented, and sometimes you get an unnecessary back and forth, people fighting over their words and ideas, and not enough trying to really understand what's going on the ground, how it really works, and what we might do productive. So my thanks to all of you for helping us get a better understanding of all of that, and I think that helps advance the discussion a lot. So with that, we'll sign off. Thank you very much, all of you again, and thanks for joining us today.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks a lot.